All right, so welcome back to the Math Refresh. Now we're going to look at this problem. In this problem, we want to find the lowest common denominator. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply each term one at a time by our lowest common denominator. Now in order to find the lowest common denominator, we're going to use a little holding pen and we're going to build our lowest common denominator. So here's our little holding pen. What we have to do is go to each term one at a time and factor the denominator into its prime factors. So for this denominator here of 8, we're going to factor that into 4 times 2. But we need each factor to be a prime number, and 4 isn't a prime number. So we're now going to factor 4 down to its prime factors. So that's going to give us 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. All right, now we're going to look at our next denominator, which is 12, and we want to factor it down to its prime factors. We can start with 6 times 2, which is 12, but 6 is not a prime number. So now we have to go back and replace 6 with its prime factors, which would be 3 times 2. So here are the prime factors for 12. And then we have to go over to 18. And now we have to factor 18 down to its prime factors. The prime factors for 18, we can start with 9 times 2. But then 9 is not a prime number. So now we have to factor 9 down to its prime factors. And that's going to give us 3 times 3. So 18 ends up being 3 times 3 times 2. Those are the prime factors for 18. Now that just leaves us with 9. And the prime factors for 9 is going to be 3 times 3. Now once we've factored each denominator down to its prime factors, then we have to go over to our holding pen. And the most times that a factor occurs in any denominator has to be covered in the holding pen. So if we look at our first denominator, which is 2 times 2 times 2, the most times that 2 occurs in this denominator is 3 times. We have to have that covered in our holding pen. Since we have no 2's at all in the holding pen, in order to cover these 3, we have to add 3 2's to the holding pen. Now, the most times that 2 occurs is covered in the holding pen on this denominator. Then we look at our next denominator, which is 12. Now, the prime factors for 12 are 3 times 2 times 2. The most times that 2 occurs in this denominator is twice. Since we already have 3 2's in our lowest common denominator holding pen, the 2's are already covered for 12. But now we look and we see we have at least 1 3 in this denominator. We look at the holding pen, there are no 3's. So in order to cover the 1 3 here, we have to add a single 3 to our holding pen. Now 12 is covered. We have 1 3, that's covered, and at least 2 2's, so that's covered. Now we go to our next denominator, which is 18. The most times that 3 occurs in 18 is twice. So we have to have at least 2 3's in the holding pen. Now over here, we only have 1 3. So in order to cover the 2 3's in 18, we have to add a single 3 to our holding pen. So now the 3's are covered, and we see we have to have at least 1 2. Well, we've got several 2's here, so the single 2 is covered. So now this denominator is covered. So now we look at our last denominator, which is 9. We have to have 2 3's in our holding pen to cover the 2 3's in the denominator. We look here, and we already have 2 3's, so this denominator is covered. So now that we've covered every denominator in the problem, our holding pen now holds the lowest common denominator for these fractions, for adding or subtracting these fractions. So we have 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8, and we have 3 times 3, which is 9. If we multiply these two numbers together, we get 72. So our lowest common denominator for adding or subtracting these fractions for this specific problem will be 72. So that means we have to have 72 in each denominator if we were going to go ahead and add or subtract. But in this problem, we're not looking to add or subtract, we're actually looking to solve for x. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to each denominator one at a time and multiply through each term by the lowest common denominator, which is 72. But I'm going to leave it in its factored form, and specifically it'll be easier to see what cancels when we go to each denominator one at a time if we leave it in its factored form. When we multiply each term, we're going to see what cancels, and whatever doesn't cancel, we're going to multiply times the numerator. Now, in between each problem, whatever operator appears, either a plus sign or an equal sign, will bring down in between each problem what any operator that's in between. So, when we multiply the first term by our lowest common denominator, we have 3 2's. We'll cancel with the 3 2's here. So if I cover those up, I'm left with 2 3's or 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So when we multiply our first term by the lowest common denominator, we get 27. Now in between, I'm going to bring down the operator, so I bring down this plus sign. Now we're going to multiply the next term by our lowest common denominator. Now notice we have 1 3 and 2 2's. So we need to cancel 1 3 and 2 2's. That leaves me with 2 times 3 uncanceled, which is 6. So now we're going to multiply 6 times the numerator. So we have 6 times 5, which gives us 30. Now we're going to bring down any operator in between. So in between the next 2 terms, we bring down our plus sign. Now when we multiply the next term by the lowest common denominator, we're going to cancel 2 3's and a single 2. So I'm going to cover up 2 3's and a single 2. That leaves me with 2 times 2 or 4 uncanceled. So we have 4 times x, which is 4x. And then we bring down any operator in between. In this case, it's an equal sign. Now we're going to multiply the last term by the lowest common denominator. In this case, we're going to multiply it, I'm sorry, not times the lowest, but times the last term. We have 2 3's. Those 2 3's will cancel with these 2 3's. Uncanceled, we have 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. So we have 8 times the numerator, which is a 1. So we have 8 times 1, which is 8. So after multiplying through each term one at a time by the lowest common denominator, we're now left with this problem right here. 27 plus 30 plus 4x equals 8. This will be a lot easier to solve for. Now that we don't have any fractions, it makes our problem a lot easier. On the left side of the equation, we have 2 like terms. We're going to combine those like terms before we go side to side with any operations. So we have 27 plus 30, which gives us 57. So we combine those like terms. We now have 57 plus 4x equals 8. Now we want to get our x term alone on the left side of the equation. So we have to subtract the 57 from both sides. Whatever we do to one side, we do to the other side to maintain our equality. On the right side, we have 8 minus 57. If I whip out my calculator, I get negative 49, maybe. Anyways, yeah, that looks good. Now we have 0 plus 4x equals negative 49, or 4x equals negative 49. That brings us to our last step, which is to get x alone on the left side equal sign. We're going to divide both sides by 4, and we end up with our answer. X is equal to negative 49 over 4. And we could convert that to a to a mixed expression, but for now, there's our answer as an improper fraction, -49/4, and cut.